Harris was a scruffy, wandering thief. One day, he woke. His first instinct was to check his gold pouch. But now only a single coin remained. He immediately accused the little girl of stealing his money, insisting that he'd had 4 gold coins before. The girl weakly tried to defend herself, insisting she hadn't stolen anything at all. When Harris demanded to know what had happened to his money, the girl replied that he himself had used it to buy her. Harris, confused and in disbelief, demanded she repeat what she just said. He took a closer look at the girl's scrawny, frail, and malnourished body. If she really was a slave, she was the worst kind imaginable. Harris tried to rack his brain, trying to remember what had happened the day before, the day of the capital's annual festival. Harris had just returned from a dungeon with his trading company, and the group was dividing up the loot. The total earnings were 25 gold coins, enough for everyone to get a comfortable share. They agreed to go out and celebrate, and invited Harris to join them, but he refused and went his own way. Harris's reclusive habits and cold personality had earned him a low standing in the group, to the point that some even called him a thief. Unfazed, Harris found another tavern by himself and ordered right at the counter. In reality, Harris was a scout. He was highly skilled at detecting and disarming traps, picking locks, identifying items, and was always on the lookout for enemies. However, his role wasn't combat-oriented at all. While he had no problem with drinking, Harris disliked drinking with that group. Actually, if he'd had a chance with Elia or Isha, he might have gone with them. But Harris knew none of them wanted anything to do with a scruffy, dirty guy like him. When the waitress returned with Harris's drink, Harris tried to hit on her. At first, she seemed receptive to his advances. But when she got a better look at his clothes and recognized the signs of a thief, she quickly made an excuse about having an extra shift. Frustrated, Harris downed his drink and left without even bothering to get his change. Knowing he'd been rejected because of his unattractive appearance, Harris decided to find a high-class escort house to hire a woman. However, when he got there, the guard blocked his way, refusing him entry. The man pointed Harris toward other areas more suitable for his kind. Furious, Harris grabbed the guard by the collar, declaring he had enough money to pay. But the guard just kicked him straight in the stomach and coldly ordered him to get lost. Even if Harris had money, this place still wouldn't welcome him. As fireworks lit up the sky to celebrate the capital's annual festival, Harris staggered around in a drunken stupor, causing a bit of trouble with a few locals and a shopkeeper. Harris's head was spinning. A throbbing headache pulled him into a vortex of exhaustion. Despite living in this bustling city, he didn't feel welcome anywhere. Accidentally, he tripped over someone's leg. It was the leg of a chained slave girl. Harris suddenly remembered that he'd gotten so drunk last night, he had bought a slave girl. At the slave market, Harris observed the girl again. His initial assessment was correct. She was clearly malnourished and not healthy enough to do any of the work a slave would normally do. Harris regretted the 3 gold coins he had spent on her, money he could have used for gambling or entertainment. Finally, he told the girl to lead him back to the slave market. There, Harris met the slave trader from last night and demanded a refund. The slave trader agreed, but only gave Harris 10 silver coins in return. The slave trader explained that 10 silver coins was only 1/5 of the original value, and that was all the girl was worth. He added that feeding slaves was expensive, and he'd still have to find a way to sell her to the arena. The arena was a place where children were locked in an enclosure with a goblin, purely for the entertainment of wealthy customers willing to pay. The trader asked Harris what he wanted to do. After a moment of thought, Harris decided to keep the girl. He took her to the park and let her drink water from the fountain. The girl thanked him for the water, but soon after, her stomach rumbled, making her incredibly embarrassed. She bowed her head, apologizing to Harris repeatedly. Seeing this, Harris gave her a piece of food. She hesitated at first, but eventually took it. Harris watched silently as she devoured the piece of meat as if it were the most delicious meal in the world. And in truth, at that moment, it probably was the most wonderful thing she had ever eaten. Watching the scene, Harris realized he had no choice but to keep her. Harris thought to himself that at the very least, he could feed her well, dress her nicely, and turn her into a proper lady. He asked the girl her name, and she replied that her name was Tiana. Harris told her that from now on, he was her master. Harris knew he had a lot of work to do. He led Tiana through the city and occasionally noticed a few curious eyes following them. Finally, they arrived at the temple to meet Alia. She chided Harris for not staying to celebrate with everyone the night before. Alia was a devout priestess who always spent her time praying and healing others. She asked Harris if he needed her help with anything. Harris asked Alia to heal Tiana's injuries. He was worried about the external wounds and scars, but was especially concerned about the condition of her bones, as her way of walking was very unusual. Alia leaned close to Harris and bluntly accused him of hurting Tiana. Whispers began to spread through the temple, undoubtedly all speaking ill of Harris. Alia publicly attacking him like that answered some of the questions Harris had always had about her character. Suddenly, Tiana loudly retorted that Alia and everyone else were wrong. She insisted that Harris had never done anything terrible to her, and she was willing to vouch for his good character. Tiana said that Harris was the kindest person she had ever known. Alia bowed her head and apologized to Harris for baselessly accusing him of such a cruel act. She gently took Tiana's hand and led her deep into the inner sanctum. While carefully washing Tiana's body before beginning the treatment, Alia tried to make conversation with her. The cold water stung the shallow wounds and whip marks on Tiana's body, but Alia advised her to try and bear it for just a little longer. She apologized to Tiana again, this time for having treated Harris unfairly based solely on his appearance and his line of work. Alia asked Tiana how she had met Harris in the first place. Tiana began to tell her life story. When she was a child, her family was attacked by monsters. Afterward, she was sold to another family, where she was beaten and tormented almost every day. The scars on her back were a testament to the suffering she had endured. However, despite her difficult past, Tiana still looked to the future with hope. She knew that fate had finally led her to a truly kind master. Alia hugged Tiana from behind, gently promising that her pure and innocent soul would always be under divine protection. Meanwhile, Harris recalled how Tiana had stood up for him in front of everyone. Although he was happy about it, he also felt her overly trusting nature could cause trouble in the future. Before long, Alia returned with Tiana, who was now clean and radiant, like a newly blossomed flower. Alia told Harris about Tiana's painful past and the hardships she'd endured. She asked him to take good care of the girl. Harris promised he would, though he didn't reveal that he still had his own plans in mind. Alia's gaze had now changed. She realized that Harris was not only a trustworthy man, but also had a kind heart. She took an object from her robes and gave it to him. It was the temple's symbol of friendship, still warm in his hand. This symbol allowed Harris to receive healing from any temple completely free of charge. Normally, it was worth up to 100 gold coins. But Alia gave it to Harris as a thank you for their meeting and for the kindness he had shown that day. Alia frankly admitted that she'd been reminded never to judge others by their appearance. She remarked that even among those with a knack for sophisticated lockpicking, there were still good people. After everything was settled, Harris prepared for the long journey back home. It was a 7-day journey on foot. Along the way, Harris asked Tiana about the condition of her leg, and she happily replied that it had fully recovered. In turn, she asked Harris about the work that he did. He explained that he was an adventurer, willing to do anything to earn money. Tiana seemed impressed, feeling that Harris could do just about anything. However, Harris humbly said that he only did simple jobs. She noticed the short sword tucked at his side, and Harris explained that he used it from time to time. As the sun began to set, Harris prepared to make camp for the night. But his instincts screamed a warning that something dangerous was nearby. He quickly pulled Tiana out of the enemy's line of sight to hide her. Harris's decision to take a shortcut had backfired. He had accidentally wandered into the path of 3 ferocious goblins. Harris estimated that the distance between him and the enemy was still quite far and considered waiting for them to pass. But one of the goblins sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. It sensed that a man and a young girl were nearby, and clearly it had no intention of welcoming them with a feast. Harris realized the dangerous situation he was in. He threw Tiana over his shoulder and ran as fast as he could. Normally, Harris could handle a few goblins, but he could sense that the group of goblins he'd run into this time was particularly bloodthirsty. They would have no trouble tracking him down and grinding his bones to dust. The weight of carrying another person while running quickly exhausted Harris. Realizing this, Tiana offered to be left behind. She said the goblins would catch up to them if they continued like this. But if she were left behind, Harris could escape. Harris told her not to think of such a foolish thing. But it was all she could think about. She didn't want a tragedy like what happened to her father to repeat itself. Harris reassured her that he had no intention of dying here. He wasn't running away blindly either. He had chosen a suitable location for an ambush. Though he wasn't a professional warrior, Harris was still a thief. And what is a thief's specialty? Unconventional warfare. This was precisely the tactic Harris planned to use. 3 goblins quickly tracked Harris to his last known location. The leader of the group caught Tiana's scent, and soon after, they saw her dress fluttering behind a tree trunk. However, when they arrived, the goblins only found a dress dangling from a tree branch. Suddenly, a small tripwire trap wrapped tightly around the lead goblin's leg. The other 2 just stood by and laughed at him, a clear sign that they were the best of friends. But as soon as a steel wire tightened around the trapped goblin's neck, the laughter of the other 2 died. The goblin tumbled to the ground, and a sharp wooden stake pierced through its chest. When the 2 remaining goblins saw the wooden stake protruding from their friend's chest, they finally realized the danger they were in. From the shadows, Harris suddenly appeared, stabbing the second goblin straight in the neck, taking it down almost instantly. The third goblin, shocked and unsure of what to do, began to smash the surrounding trees with its large mace, trying to destroy any potential ambush points Harris could use. Its keen nose led it to a small cave. But just as it took 2 steps in that direction, a small stone hit it on the back of the head. The goblin spun around, swinging its weapon behind it, but only hit the cold air. More and more stones rained down from out of sight, occasionally hitting the goblin and other hard surfaces. The goblin's sense of smell was overwhelmed by the noise and echoes of the falling stones. Harris threw one last stone, causing the goblin to look forward. The goblin realized the trick too late. Harris plunged his sword tip straight into its skull, and with a slight twist, the goblin fell just like the others. Harris called for Tiana, and she emerged from the cave, wearing Harris's cloak. He was glad she was safe, and simply told her to get changed quickly. Once again, under the crescent moon, Harris and Tiana set up camp to rest. Tiana praised Harris for fighting so well earlier, though he explained that in a head-on fight, he would have been crushed for sure. Goblins have a very keen sense of smell, but in exchange, their eyesight is poor. Harris's biggest challenge wasn't finding their blind spot, but finding an angle to take down the first goblin, which made the rest of the battle much easier. Harris praised Tiana for their victory. If it weren't for her dress, he wouldn't have been able to distract the goblin like that. Tiana blushed, confessing she didn't know what to do when Harris had asked her to take off her clothes earlier. Harris gave her some food and told her to get some rest after a long week on the road. At last, Harris and Tiana arrived in the town of Norn. After a short walk, Harris led Tiana to his home, a simple 2-story house located near the edge of the forest. After showing Tiana inside, Harris quickly removed his combat gear and left to take care of a few things. He told Tiana to look after the house while he was gone, and warned her not to touch a chest in the room. Harris stopped by the Adventurers Guild and received his certificate of completion for clearing the dungeon earlier. He also turned in a small pouch of goblin parts, hoping to get a reward for the ones he'd slain. The receptionist, Jonathan, was surprised that Harris had managed to deal with them, but Harris turned down any further monster hunting quests. Afterward, Harris stopped by Bach's repair shop and asked him to fix an old pair of earrings. Bach was happy to fix the earrings, but he wondered why Harris would suddenly bring in jewelry for repair. Harris deflected all of Bach's attempts to dig for more information, and Bach charged him 3 copper coins for the job. Lamenting that he couldn't fix Harris's personality, Bach told him to come pick them up tomorrow. When he returned home, Harris found his house had been cleaned spotlessly. There wasn't a speck of dust left. He could even run his finger across the surface and not find a single particle. Tiana was worried she had done something wrong, but Harris reassured her that he was just surprised. Tiana happily invited Harris to sit down so she could serve him his meal. Tiana offered him a stew she had made from leftover meat from their trip and some herbs from the back garden. Harris had no idea he even had a garden. He'd always thought it was just full of weeds. Harris took a big bite and praised Tiana for her delicious cooking. He then encouraged her to sit down and eat with him. Tiana didn't think she was worthy of sitting at the same table as Harris, but Harris insisted that she do so. He even told her to get him another bowl while she was at it. After they had eaten their fill, Tiana asked Harris if he wanted to rest on the bed. Harris looked down at his state and remarked that he needed a bath first. Tiana cheerfully went to prepare a bath for him. Harris sat and relaxed while he waited. A few minutes later, Tiana announced that the bath was ready. Harris went around back and found a hot tub with foaming soap. He heard Tiana from behind, offering to wash his back for him. Harris quickly turned around. But when he saw Tiana, he was completely taken aback. Tiana asked if she was disturbing him, but Harris just made a mental note to feed her a little more later. Harris quickly undressed and let Tiana wash his back. Tiana recounted how Alia had washed her back at the temple, and how that made her want to wash his. Harris, upon realizing that Alia had washed Tiana's back, began to have fantasies of Alia washing his own. However, just as things were getting heated, Harris suddenly remembered Tiana's soft yet strong hands, which she used to grip the hammer. As she smashed the heads of the undead, Harris suddenly lost all desire and encouraged Tiana to take a bath after him. That evening, Tiana wore an old shirt of Harris's, but because it was so big, it looked like she was wearing a dress. Even so, she still thanked him for the gesture. When Harris said it was time for bed, Tiana walked in the opposite direction and made a small nest for herself in the kitchen. Harris asked what she was doing, and she asked if she should sleep in the stables instead. Harris led Tiana to his room, but she was worried that as a slave, she shouldn't be sleeping in the same bed as him. Harris thought he'd be in bigger trouble if she got sick from the cold, so the matter was non-negotiable, and he threw her a blanket. Tiana thanked Harris for the blanket, and Harris climbed into bed. She was worried because Harris didn't seem to be using a blanket, and he explained that the one he gave her was all he had. Tiana scolded him, though Harris insisted he had slept in worse conditions in the dungeons. However, Tiana was adamant about giving Harris the blanket, knowing he had been through so much these past few days, and she wanted to make sure he at least got a good night's sleep in his own home. Harris reassured her that he had had plenty of time to relax, thanks to all the hard work she had done around the house. Tiana was grateful for the compliment, but she confessed that her sewing skills weren't up to par. She also lamented that, as a slave, no one would take her as a wife. Harris told her she didn't need to do everything perfectly right away, and if she couldn't sew her own clothes, she could just go to a tailor. Tiana wrapped the blanket around Harris, but left a small portion for herself. Harris remarked that he would have to go shopping tomorrow, and Tiana offered to run those errands for him. Soon after, Tiana fell asleep, and Harris got the good night's rest he was promised. Harris wished Tiana a good night, and Tiana wished him a good night as well. The next day, Harris finally went with Tiana to the city. Tiana apologized for making him go with her, but Harris admitted that he was also at fault. He hadn't realized that Tiana was illiterate and therefore couldn't read the map he had made for her. To comfort her, Harris said she just needed to take things she didn't know how to do slowly. Harris showed Tiana how to follow the map, and they split up to do their own work. However, Harris was restless with worry and kept an eye on her from the shadows. Tiana wandered around in a state of near confusion until she found the shop on the map. The shopkeeper, Bertha, came out to greet Tiana, and when she saw the slave collar on her neck, her eyes quickly narrowed with suspicion. Upon learning Tiana was working under Harris, Bertha placed a gentle hand on Tiana's shoulder and asked about her current living conditions. Tiana recounted how she had been attacked by orcs on her way to Norn birth, and how incredibly relieved she felt to have survived. She was even more surprised to learn that Harris had fought the orcs. Tiana imitated how Harris acted right before fighting the orcs, and Harris covered his face in embarrassment. Tiana continued to praise Harris, though Harris wished she wouldn't. She told Bertha about how Harris had fed her, given her clothes, and always looked after her health. After hearing this, Bertha's opinion of Harris changed. Though she knew Harris was an alcoholic, Bertha understood that she would need to sell Tiana some stronger spices. She asked Tiana how much money she had, and Tiana took out a small pouch of money. Bertha remarked that the amount was enough for Harris to feed Tiana properly and get her to a healthier weight. Bertha gently placed her hand around Tiana's wrist and whispered in her ear that once she had a little more meat on her bones, she'd be even more attractive. Bertha gave Tiana a meal plan, while Harris wondered what the hell they were talking about. Seeing nothing to worry about, Harris went on with his work. He returned to Bach, who had finished repairing the earring from yesterday. Before long, Tiana also entered the shop. Harris was relieved to see she hadn't gotten lost. Bach beckoned for Tiana to come closer and put the repaired earring back in her ear. Bach felt something was missing, so he reached under the counter and pulled out a fluffy white dress for Tiana. He explained that he'd had trouble finding a buyer for it, and remarked that it seemed like the dress had been waiting for her. Harris admitted that Tiana looked beautiful in the dress, but he grumbled that Bach should be thanking him for taking this hard-to-sell item off his hands. Bach defended his actions, pointing out that there was nothing wrong with letting Tiana look beautiful, which would also make Harris look better. He warned Harris that he wasn't living alone anymore, and if he wasn't careful, he'd run out of money. Tiana worried that she couldn't wear something so expensive, but Bach told her not to think too much about it. He then directed Harris to the Adventurers Guild, where Jonathan had been looking pale all morning. Following Bach's directions, Harris went to the Adventurers Guild, and Jonathan was glad to see him. Jonathan told Harris about a group of rookies who hadn't returned from a day-long dungeon expedition and that a rescue party was being formed to search for them. Jonathan was concerned that the rookies might have been overwhelmed, because the dungeon they entered was complex and easy to get lost in if you weren't careful. Although it wasn't impossible for them to have been completely wiped out, veteran adventurers were in short supply. And that's when Jonathan remembered Harris. A woman approached them and asked if she could join the rescue party. The next morning, Harris set out on the rescue mission, while a worried Tiana saw him off and prayed for his safe return. Harris was among the other adventurers who had joined the rescue party. The rest seemed quite optimistic about finishing the mission quickly. The woman from before spoke up, criticizing them for acting so carelessly, and reminded them that this was no picnic. To clear things up, she introduced herself as Gina. The guy in heavy armor was named Kompa, and the other two men were Zoe and Ted. Kompa gave a polite bow of respect before heading inside. Harris did a final check. Their objective was to find the missing rookie party. They just needed to clear the first floor. Ted asked why they weren't going to the second floor, and Harris replied that if those rookies actually made it to the second floor, they were most likely already dead. The second floor was very dangerous, as it was crawling with goblins, orcs, and monsters from the fourth floor. Zoe and Ted looked pretty worried. Harris immediately deduced that none of them had likely ever made it to the fourth floor. The fourth floor was home to monsters that could kill even veterans. Harris started thinking about turning back right after checking the first floor. Gina, not wanting to let things end like that, asserted that she could use level 4 magic. She was determined to search the entire second floor, as that was their duty as the vanguard. Led by Kompa, they easily cut down the goblins they encountered. Based on their numbers, Harris felt that the rookie party might have been wiped out right here. The only thing left to confirm was Gina's magical ability. She caught Harris's eye as he was looking at her, and he remarked that they still needed to stay on their guard. Kompa spotted a treasure chest out in the open. Ted checked the chest and saw no signs that it had been opened or tampered with. It was Harris's turn to check. He took out his lock-picking tools, and in just a few seconds, the chest was open. Gina was impressed at how quickly Harris finished. Harris replied that it was his profession, so it was only natural. The others joked that they'd need to lock their doors more carefully, but Gina reminded them that they were being disrespectful to a talented pathfinder. Kompa found it strange that such an obvious treasure chest hadn't been touched. He wondered if the rookie party had skipped the first floor entirely and gone straight to the second. They discussed going to the second floor, and Harris decided to do it. However, as soon as they reached the second floor, Ted spotted something in the distance. Monster wolves. They haven't spotted them yet, but if they want to move forward, they'll have to fight their way out. Kompa suggested that Gina's level 4 magic should be strong enough to wipe them out in one shot. Harris agreed with that assessment. Feeling a bit pressured to perform, Gina told everyone not to get their hopes up too high. After a short chant, she used the spell Ice Break, creating a large shard of ice that shot straight toward the dire wolves. While the others were impressed, Harris was not. The dire wolves, which were far from dead, immediately attacked Ted. Zoe and Kompa instantly formed a defensive line. One of the wolves got past them, but thanks to Harris's quick thinking, he incinerated one of the dire wolves. Harris then took care of the rest. Kompa was impressed by how easily Harris handled the wolves, but he attributed it to Harris's previous experience in dealing with their weaknesses. However, he questioned Gina's decision to use Ice Break. Even though it's level 4 magic, ice spells are highly ineffective against dire wolves. She could have just used a simple firebolt and ended it from the start. Unable to come up with an excuse, Gina admitted that the only attack magic she could use was ice magic. She tried to end the conversation and stormed off angrily, but she accidentally bumped into Kompa. Harris went over to see what was going on, and that's when everyone discovered the deformed bodies of the rookie team, just as they had feared. The rookies were already dead before they even arrived. Harris had a feeling, but he didn't think it would be this bad. Fortunately, there were enough remains for Harris to identify who was who. However, Gina couldn't stand the gruesome sight and excused herself to go throw up. Now, Harris had to confirm that these were indeed the bodies of the rookie team. But neither Zoe nor Ted were up for the task, leaving only him and Kompa. The others thought the rookies had been killed by the dire wolves. But Harris keenly observed that there were too few wounds on the bodies for it to be the wolves' work. The wolves had likely just scavenged the corpses after they were already dead. Harris moved in closer to examine the bodies and discovered 2 puncture marks on one of the rookies' wrists. Before he could draw any conclusions, Kompa announced that he had finished checking the other bodies. After finishing their task, they realized Gina still hadn't come back. Gina was ashamed for being reduced to such a state, especially after she had criticized the others earlier. But before she could rejoin the group, a snake dropped down in front of her, and she screamed. Harris and the others immediately recognized the danger, and by the time they caught up to Gina, they found a swarm of black-skinned ice snakes. Harris realized that these snakes were likely the ones who had killed the new expedition team. A few snakes slithered into Ted's armor, Zoe's and Kompa's, causing them to flee in a panic. Harris saw Gina frozen in place, unable to move, and had no other choice but to carry her. They hurried to the door, and when they got outside, they discovered their 3 vanguards had already left. Gina thanked him for his help, but she was also worried about his injuries. Harris had a few bites on his neck, but since he was accustomed to the poison, he knew it wouldn't be dangerous for the next few hours. Suddenly, Gina felt something squirming inside her clothes. A snake had slithered into her shirt. Harris decisively lifted the hem of her shirt, causing the snake to fall out. But it also earned him a slap from Gina, a true double-edged sword. Gina apologized for slapping him, even as Harris was stabbing the snake, killing it. His biggest problem now was the poison. Unfortunately, while he had an antidote, Gina did not. She'd been too dependent on the priest and her party members to prepare an antidote beforehand. Harris checked her wounds and found several bites on her body, with some of them very close to her heart. If he didn't give her the antidote immediately, she would die before they could reach Norn. Harris said he had an antidote, but only enough for one person. He told her that if he returned to Norn without taking it, his treatment costs would be massive. He was willing to give her the antidote if she promised to cover his medical expenses, and she agreed. By swearing on an oath stone, Gina swore to repay Harris the debt she owed. After Gina took the antidote, Harris told her to head back to the city while he would go to a temple for treatment. Gina said that she was in his debt, but he replied that he had already received his payment. When Harris finally got home, Tiana was there to welcome him. Harris was surprised to see her up so early, but Tiana had been worried because he hadn't returned after dark. She was afraid he might have been injured, and he explained that he had stopped by the temple before coming home. This only made Tiana more anxious, thinking Harris must have been so badly injured he needed treatment, but he swore it was just a few scratches. Tiana was relieved, but then Harris's stomach rumbled, reminding him that he had forgotten to eat. Tiana offered to make him something, but she quickly realized they were out of ingredients. Harris told her he planned on collecting his reward for the quest and then go grocery shopping, and he invited her to come along. Tiana happily agreed. When Harris arrived at the guild, Jonathan gave him 8 silver coins, even though the announced reward was 4. Jonathan explained that the extra money was a bonus for bringing back everyone's belongings, and an additional reward from Ted, Zoe, and Compa. Harris was worried the 3 men might complain, but Jonathan assured him that he had already handled their complaints. Frontliners who abandon their rearguard members don't deserve the full reward. He insisted that Harris should take it. Jonathan had also heard that Harris had voluntarily given his antidote to Gina. He joked that if it were him, he wouldn't have given up the antidote no matter how much the other person begged. Tiana overheard this and glared at Harris. Harris awkwardly left the guild and suggested they go shopping right away. However, Tiana didn't let him off the hook, asking him about the poisoning incident. Harris said that he was fine, and that was all that mattered, but Tiana was upset because he had told her there was no danger, and suggested this was because of her status as a slave. Harris promised to prepare the proper arrangements in case he died. Tiana said that wasn't the issue. She remained irritable. Even when they got home, Harris could decode and dismantle traps, but he couldn't figure out a girl's feelings. Despite that, Harris noticed that Tiana had prepared a rather extravagant meal. Suddenly, he heard 2 quick knocks at the door. A familiar voice called out from the other side. Tiana was about to open the door, but Harris decided to do it himself. When he opened the door, Harris came face to face with a man who looked his complete opposite. He was riding a white horse, and everything about him exuded a very different aura. Harris and Zecht used to be on the same team. Before he sported his signature 5 o'clock shadow, Zecht had announced his intention to retire from being an adventurer, but because he had so many fans in the guild, everyone, especially the women, was in an uproar. Harris asked Zecht what he planned to do after retiring, but Zecht couldn't promise he wouldn't laugh. He leaned in close and whispered that he wanted to become a holy knight. Harris burst out laughing, despite having promised not to. He explained that he didn't find it funny, just that he thought it would be something more serious. Harris thought the idea of Zecht becoming a holy knight was fantastic, and he fully supported Zecht pursuing that dream without hesitation. He raised his cup and wished Zecht a life of no regrets. Zecht recounted his story for Tiana. Even after becoming a holy knight, he still visited Harris regularly. Tiana listened, captivated by the story from a bygone era. Harris asked Zecht what he was doing here, but Zecht replied that he didn't need a reason to visit his best friend. However, Harris was still suspicious of him. Zecht asked if Tiana had made this meal, and when he implied it wasn't to his taste, Tiana immediately offered to make something else. Zecht told her not to bother. This steak was wonderful. Harris told Zecht to back off, suspecting he was trying to make a move on Tiana, but Zecht swore that wasn't his intention. His only concern was whether Tiana could make so many dishes with Harris's meager income. He even joked about whether Harris was making an honest living. Zecht had intended to drag Harris back to the capital if he found him still living a life of solitude and alcoholism. However, at this point, he had given up on that idea. He felt relieved knowing that Harris and Tiana were together. Harris felt as if Zecht was making it seem like he was the one being taken care of. But that was because Harris never took care of himself. He could tell that Harris often made Tiana worry. Zecht suggested that Tiana should be direct about what she wants since Harris is an insensitive guy. Harris remarked that Zecht had become much more blunt since becoming a holy knight. But Zecht noted that a certain degree of bluntness was necessary to succeed in the role. However, he had other reasons for being so blunt, which was that Harris wouldn't listen to him otherwise. Harris wanted to meet the person Zecht was talking about, and Zecht offered to hand him a mirror. Afterward, Zecht told Tiana that this was how she should handle Harris. Zecht laughed and asked for another serving, and Tiana happily went to get him another one. Harris and Zecht laughed about the situation. After Zecht finished eating, he got on his horse, and before leaving, he asked Tiana to take good care of Harris. Tiana worriedly said that Zecht seemed like a wonderful person. He asked her if she liked guys like Zecht, and she said no, she was just playing along with Harris. Harris gave her a gentle pat on the head. As soon as they were back inside, Harris announced that he was going to bed. Dealing with Zecht had completely exhausted him. Tiana went back to her chores and told Harris to let her know if he needed anything. Harris wanted Tiana to rest for now and leave the chores for later, but she reassured him that she'd gotten plenty of rest the night before. She encouraged him to go get some rest. Harris told her to wake him up if he wasn't up by dinner time, as he didn't want his food to get cold. Tiana cupped her cheeks to steel herself for the work ahead. After getting water from the well, Tiana poured the water into a wash basin and got to work. She clumsily washed the clothes and hung them up to dry. But while washing Harris's underwear, she discovered a tear in the back and made a mental note to tell him about it later. Harris woke up a few hours later, and as he came out of his room, Tiana approached him with a worried look on her face. It wasn't his underwear she was worried about. They had to go shopping again because they were out of ingredients. And Harris blamed Zecht for eating so much during his visit. Harris remarked that he wouldn't be able to accompany Tiana like this forever, so she had to start learning how to read, write, and do arithmetic. He knew Tiana was a fast learner and was confident she could pick up these life skills quickly. His main problem was how to teach her in the first place. Suddenly, he heard someone shout, "Get out!" As he turned the corner, he saw Gina in a heated argument with her landlord. Although she finally paid her late rent, the landlord was still kicking her out because he was always of the opinion that she paid her rent late. He told her to give up being a mercenary and kicked her out. Gina picked up her discarded belongings, grumbling about her landlord. When she looked up and saw Harris watching her, she panicked. She composed herself and held on to what little dignity she could, but there wasn't much left. Gina complained about her situation and the landlord, saying she had warned him beforehand that she would be paying late. A drunken Gina continued to ramble on while Harris avoided her gaze. Tiana's eyes fell on Gina's belongings. Tiana felt pity for Gina and said the landlord had gone too far by throwing her things out. Gina reached out to Tiana, cupped her cheeks, and said she wanted Tiana to be her daughter. Harris reminded her that she didn't have any money, which sobered Gina up. She didn't even have a place to sleep for the night. Harris asked her why she was kicked out in the first place, since the landlord's change of heart must have been for some reason. Gina refreshed Harris's memory about the 3 party leaders from the day before: Zoe, Ted, and Compa. Her landlord was Zoe's uncle. It all made sense now. After Gina reported the 3 leaders' cowardice to the guild, Zoe must have told her uncle, causing him to kick her out. Harris wasn't surprised that Zoe and her uncle would hold a grudge against her. However, Gina said she wasn't the only one they hated. As it turned out, they had a grudge against Harris too. The trio had supposedly been found in the middle of town, foaming at the mouth from snake bite poisoning. Harris lamented that things had gotten out of hand so quickly. Gina adopted a might-as-well attitude and raised her glass to toast Harris, her perfect partner in crime. Tiana joined in, raising her glass of juice. Tiana asked Gina what she planned to do now, and Gina thought for a moment before saying she might go to another city. Gina found it hard to give up her side job in the city. But the life of an adventurer was one of unexpected turns. Harris asked Gina about her side job, and she explained that she worked as a tutor, teaching people to read, write, and a little bit of magic. Thanks to that, she earned about 12 silver coins a month. Harris was surprised she was homeless despite earning such a respectable amount. But since they lived far from the capital, Gina had to pay a higher price for magic scrolls. Harris found this to be a waste. He had been hoping to find a tutor to teach Tiana how to read and write. Gina said she would be happy to do it, but without a place to stay, she was forced to leave. Tiana tugged on Harris's sleeve and suggested he rent his spare room to Gina. However, Gina was very hesitant to stay in a small, enclosed room with a man, but Harris informed her that he had a full house and a separate room for her to use. Harris would let Gina stay for free on the condition that she teach Tiana how to read and write. Gina thought about his offer and finally accepted. Tiana joyfully began to call Gina teacher affectionately. Gina thought Tiana was exaggerating and would prefer if Tiana called her by her name. However, Tiana was reluctant to do so, but Gina insisted. Tiana asked if she could call Gina Big Sis instead, which made Gina a little flustered. Gina apologized for her somewhat rude request, but she asked Tiana why she wanted to call her that. Tiana admitted that she had always wanted an older sister, so Gina agreed to let Tiana call her that. Tiana called Gina Sis for the first time, which filled Gina's mind with a warm and pleasant feeling. Harris didn't want to interrupt their intimate moment, but he informed Gina that her rent and her debt to him were two separate matters. Gina had been secretly hoping he would forgive her debt, but she promised to pay him back no matter what. Tiana smiled and hoped to get along with Gina from now on, and Gina felt the same. Harris helped carry Gina's belongings to his home. Gina was speechless when she saw how large Harris's house was. It was completely different from what she had imagined, making her wonder how Harris could afford a house like that. Tiana went inside first to make tea, leaving Harris to show Gina to her new room. Although the room was quite nice, it was completely empty. Harris said she was lucky he hadn't turned it into a storage room. Still, Gina felt that living here would be much easier than in her previous space. She looked out the window and saw a well in Harris's backyard. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house seemed too big for one person to live in. She asked Harris if his family was wealthy, since it would be difficult for an adventurer from the countryside to afford such a large house. It also didn't feel like Harris's ideal home. He asked if he really had to answer that question, but Gina shook her head, saying she was just curious about his circumstances. Tiana gently opened the door and announced that the tea was ready. Gina eagerly went downstairs. She told Harris the house was wonderful and thanked him for carrying her luggage. Gina's body relaxed as the hot tea helped her unwind. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone else make tea for her. Gina noticed that Tiana did most, if not all, of the housework. Gina asked Tiana if she made her own apron, and Tiana explained that she was just using an apron that was already here. Gina was a bit confused. The apron wasn't the kind she would use. Gina could tell from the crude patches and alterations that Tiana wasn't skilled at sewing, so she offered to teach Tiana how to sew. In return, she wanted Tiana to teach her about the house. Harris felt happy for Tiana. However, to teach her sewing, Gina would need some materials. Harris suggested they should get some sleep. He told Gina to sleep on the sofa, but Tiana offered to sleep on the sofa so Gina could have the bed, as there was only one. Harris turned away and braced himself for the worst as he went to confirm a few details. Gina asked Tiana where she usually slept if there was only one bed in the house. Tiana innocently replied that she slept in the same bed as Harris. Gina looked at Harris as if he were an insect being crushed under the sole of her shoe, but remarked that she had no right to interfere with how he treated his slave. Harris swore he wasn't doing anything illegal. Gina reminded Tiana that men and women who aren't in a relationship don't usually share a bed. Tiana didn't know that. Gina offered to sleep on the sofa, but she invited Tiana to do the same. Once Gina was settled on the sofa, Tiana asked Harris if it was really okay for Gina to sleep there. Harris reassured her that Gina was an adventurer and had probably slept in worse places. More importantly, he told Tiana she should get some sleep. Tiana took off her earrings, carefully placing them on the bedside table, and climbed into bed. After a few minutes of trying to sleep, Tiana asked Harris about Gina's earlier remark that men and women don't usually share a bed. Tiana insisted that she was perfectly fine sleeping anywhere, but Harris reassured her that sharing a bed with her was special. Tiana was a little touched by this. Gina, who had been eavesdropping on the entire conversation, could sleep peacefully, knowing there was nothing to worry about. Harris told Tiana to get some sleep, and she turned over, placing her hand on Harris's back and wishing him good night. Harris smiled and wished her a good night. Tiana slept safe and sound under the bright moonlight from the full moon that illuminated the sky.